Because there is a sense almost, isn't there, that you have people in the city who aren't going to be affected by this making decisions for those in the countryside.
Yes, and more generally, just a feeling in rural Ireland, what people really want is just to be able to get on with their lives, you know. Government should be about making people's lives, citizens' lives a little bit better each year. And without getting into sort of macro politics, a lot of people in rural Ireland would be quite happy if they were left alone to do their own thing. But things like this, come in and they're a challenge. I'm part of a group called the East Clare Environmental Protection Group. It's a company limited by guarantee, which we set up about 2-3 years ago. And its objects are to look after the environment. We've got on the cards at the moment up to 66 wind turbines being erected within a 20-mile radius of Broadford. And when I heard about the turbines first, I thought, well, I'm not anti-renewable energy. But when I heard that they were going to be 185 metres tall, which it is effectively the elevation of the hill that you can see there, and a few of them are going to be near the top of the hill, I realised just how monstrous these things are going to be. And there are going to be 66 of them across the various valleys around us. And East Clare, I don't think people realise just how pretty it is. People, talk about Cork and Kerry and McGillicuddy Reeks and so on. But they're very surprised when they come here just how beautiful it is. But it's not just about visuals. It's about so much more. The more you dig into this, the more you realise that there are awful things which happen to communities as a result of these wind farms. And we face a situation where the wind farm developers are able to rely on guidelines from 2006, which are way out of date. I mean, they were produced when wind turbines were a third of the size, if not less. And those guidelines were meant to be updated in 2019. In fact, there are draft 2019 guidelines which are sitting on some minister's desk. And they should have been adopted, but they haven't, which leaves the developers able to say, well, we abide by the 2006 guidelines and pick and choose. Sometimes they'll say, well, in this case, we're applying the 2019 draft guidelines, but they don't have to. And that's one of the irritations with the central government and its attitude to wind energy. But, if we had a little more transparency and accountability about these things, then people wouldn't feel quite so, isolated and not being, looked after. So one of the other issues we've got is that we're relatively close to Shannon Airport. Shannon Airport is a very big generator of business for the Midwest, a major artery for not just for tourists, but also for business. And over the years, various companies have tried to put up or applied for permission to put up wind turbines on the Trottertot Hill. And each time it's been refused because of the potential impact on Shannon. So AirNav and Shannon Airport have both objected quite strongly to these three proposals because of the likely interference with radar. That this could impact not just on Shannon, but on Dublin. And in theory, it's possible that it would stop any further expansion of Shannon. Now, some people might say, well, great, we want to less air travel. But, Shannon is very important for tourism in this part of the world and also very important for business. And we're not quite sure how the board are going to deal with this because it seems crazy that the board could accept evidence from the developers, hired experts who were paid for by the developers, adopt that over the heads of AirNav and Shannon Airport, who've got no skin in the game about wind energy, but they have in relation to protecting the airport, protecting air traffic control, not just for Shannon, but also for Dublin. And I'm just really surprised that it hasn't gained more traction in the press. Our local TD, Cathal Crowe, is now making quite a lot of noise about this, and we're very grateful to him for that. I think it's really important that the aviation consequences are understood. But we do feel that the sort of tide is turning against us, and so many projects have been given the green light.
Nick, in terms of the development itself, so you've actually described it as almost an industrial level wind farm. How are people in the local community feeling about this development? We were driving in and, you have a lot of signs opposing this. So there's obviously a lot of local opposition and you know this within your own organisation.
Yeah, I mean, once people realised exactly what this meant, and that involved a lot of going around knocking at people's doors because the consultation materials which were issued didn't give the scale of what was going on. People started to really realise what was going on. So in relation to the three projects, each one had well over 200 objections, and the same over at Seaburner with Clare and Carrigagowan and Firebeg. Big local opposition, but again that doesn't seem to count for anything. Climate change legislation. It's cited again and again as overriding virtually everything.
What power do the local county councils have?
For smaller developments, which don't go straight to the board, they can exercise their planning powers and refuse or give permission. But once it goes to the board, then they're out of the picture. I mean, one of the other issues is imposition of conditions. So we've seen planning permission granted with conditions about shadow flicker, no shadow flicker, restrictions on noise levels to a certain decibel level. But the problem is enforcement of those conditions. There's the Offaly case where there was noise nuisance caused over a certain decibel level, which was in the conditions. But the local authority, for one reason or another, were unable or unwilling to enforce those conditions. And we've had cases where conditions can't be enforced because nobody can enforce against a company which is overseas.
I know in other cases, Nick, things like sleep disturbances have been cited due to noise, the creation of an unpleasant environment, things like stress and anxiety. Would you talk us through a few of those objections and a few of these factors, things like low frequency noise, shadow flicker, and how these things might impact and are likely to impact on residents here?
Yeah, so interestingly, there have been a few recent cases where the High Court has accepted claimants' claims that they've been affected by noise nuisance. So private nuisance claims in Wexford, we had the Webster case, where the judge ordered that the turbines be switched off. The Waterford case at Gibbet Hill, a case in Roscommon. And I think the frustration is that as far as ABP is concerned, they will consider noise nuisance, but they will also then say we're satisfied with the mitigation measures proposed by the developer. Because once it's off their desk, at that point it becomes the residents' problem. And if they want to take action, they're faced with immense litigation costs, huge delay, years before cases come to trial, and then trials which can last weeks, and the costs involved in that are enormous. So it takes people with real determination to bring these cases, and hats off to those people to have done that. And of course they will face pressure along the way from the defendant developers who will push them into trying to settle with them, offering big amounts of money to drop the case because they don't want a precedent. But we now have several precedents, in particular the Webster case, which I think it has sent tremors through the wind farm developers forums. It's very important.
And that couple in Wexford, so they were awarded €360,000 in damages in June. And as you said, time was a factor there. It was a 7-year-long legal battle before they got that verdict. And I believe it's the first time that an Irish court has actually ordered the total shutdown of a wind turbine. So 3 out of 6 of them had to be turned off. They, in that case, claimed that they had not been made aware of the proposals for the wind farm and that it destroyed the use of their home, the enjoyment of their home. Would you say that's been a factor here too, where locals have not been made aware? Has there been a public consultation process?
Yeah, I mean, there has. I mean, to be fair, there has been consultation, and Knockshanvo, the nearest development, they carried out a big consultation. So did Oatfield, to a less extent Ballycar, but we're not so that's further over. But to be fair, they did. But nobody appreciated how big these things were, and it wasn't evident in the community newsletter, and. And to be fair to the community liaison people, they were very fair. I think an irritation that I have is that the developers and their staff, they seek to take the high moral ground that they're looking after the planet, and but they're not. I mean, they're everybody knows that they're here to generate profits. I mean, Ørsted, a Danish company, they used to drill the North Sea, but they pivoted to renewables when they saw what was coming. So they're there to make profit, and if there was a bit more transparency about that, and less of the you're a climate change denier or you're against climate change, I think we'd have more respect for them. But I go back to this thing about looking after the environment. How can you say you're looking after the environment when you will actually risk the extermination of a species and cause a huge disruption to wildlife? It's just, I mean, it's beyond belief.
In terms of the 2006 guidelines, so those guidelines were supposed to be replaced with updated guidelines in 2019, obviously 6 years ago, and those were to relate to things such as how far back wind turbines had to be from homes, minimal noise, shadow flicker. And the interesting thing, as you've raised, is that these guidelines have been drafted, but they haven't been implemented. The Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, has said that there's been a problem in terms of the distance between wind farms and where people are living. You even had, there's video footage from 2013 of the current Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, asking Enda Kenny to have the guidelines updated. But since then, both the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach have been in government for a number of years. The guidelines have not been updated despite the health risks involved. Why do you think the government are sitting on this?
Well, I don't know for sure, but my best guess is that the Wind Energy Ireland and the lobbyists for wind farms have put pressure on the government, because the government knows that they will challenge two things in particular, which is zero shadow flicker and the decibel level for noise nuisance. Those are the two things which concern the wind farm developers. And it's almost certainly that the government is concerned about, or indeed a legal challenge from another group. That's quite possible. Now, I'm not here to criticise the government. Let me make that clear. And they've got a challenge to reach the 2030. One of the major planks of good governance is transparency and accountability. And we just don't seem to get that when it comes to wind farm development.
Do you have any faith that this project can be, reduced, or that it can be stopped, and that the objections put forward by yourselves will be heard and will be taken into account? And what kind of timeline are you looking at here?
Well, difficult to say. I don't think there'll be a decision until next year now, with this request for further information made by the board, and they've got to look at the responses and so on. The board are in a difficult position. They've got three developments pretty much in the same area. Do they refuse all three? Do they allow all three? I mean, what's in between? If they don't allow one, allow the two others, the one will appeal, and almost certainly the appeal will be allowed. If all three are refused, they'll all appeal. This is going to go on, and we're determined to see it through to the end. And we will go to judicial review. The new planning legislation has made it harder for us, but we've got a determined group of people, and a very able group of people as well. I mean, I gave you the submission that we're putting in today, and it is it's a fantastic document. I mean, and we've all had input into that document, and we've got a bunch of people who have considerable expertise. I don't think people, I don't want to criticise people in Dublin, but that's the one thing we have appreciated since we came here, that there does seem to be a big divide between the town and rural communities. It is the same in the UK. It always has been complaints about the southeastern London compared to the rest of the country. And I understand why that's happened. But I do think that people need to understand how important rural Ireland is to not just the economy, but to what Ireland is.
Because there is a sense, almost, isn't there, that you have people in the city who aren't going to be affected by this, making decisions for those in the countryside.
Yes, yeah, and more generally, just a feeling in rural Ireland, what people really want is just to be able to get on with their lives. Government should be about making people's lives, citizens' lives, a little bit better each year. And without getting into sort of macro politics, a lot of people in rural Ireland would be quite happy if they were left alone to do their own thing. But things like this, come in and they're a challenge.